Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Cherno Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. It's time to take some of your questions, and we've got a couple starting on the Patreon this week. First one is from David Hutchison, who asks, can you zoom in a little bit on why Canadian media can't/won't nuance provincial positions, particularly around pharmacare, such as Quebec already has a full program versus Alberta, who has none and wants to burn down the house before they even read the bill? The things about Canadian media that are, I don't know, weird and interesting is that we have this real obsession with making everything a federal problem. And I don't know if that's entirely because we find federal issues sexier, or if federal bureaus are better resourced than most provincial bureaus. If we think that if it becomes a federal issue, or that we can make it a national issue, that it might get more attention than if it's a provincial one. I'm not entirely sure there. But when it comes to nuancing some of these positions, again, it's partially the desire to make it a federal issue so they don't want to have to deal with the provincial side of it. But also, in the case around pharmacare, we wind up talking about slightly different things when we're trying to put this together. For example, Quebec's pharmacare program is not really a full pharmacare program. It's mandatory insurance, and there's a public option available, which is not the same as a national single-payer system, and does not have the features of a national single-payer system, such as the kinds of bulk purchasing ability that the federal government would have if they did for the entire country. So that's, again, these are also nuances that aren't being discussed in this kind of a thing. I wish I could give you a good reason why they're not, but such is the state of Canadian journalism right now. And as much as I wish I could fix it, I'm just one person, and so I just do what I can. But I'm not sure if that's a suitable answer, but that's what I can tell you. Next question, still on Patreon, is from Martin, who asks, given the premise that constitutions can sometimes fall out of date or meaning, which article of Canada's constitution is most in need of change for continued functioning of our society? Why? Which article of Canada's constitution would you personally most like to see changed? That's kind of a tough one, and I've been going over the Constitution, the 1867 and the 1982 documents, trying to think about things that are kind of outdated and whatnot. The 1867 Constitution is a really weird hybrid beast. Because it's got a lot of stuff that has to deal with the early four provinces and how they were establishing themselves and separating themselves, such as Ontario and Quebec becoming separate provinces after being the province of United Canada as a colony, and so on. So there's a lot of weird stuff in there, but it's kind of there as a historical artifact, but also just that's kind of how the country functions in and of itself like that. But when thinking about it, like one of the things that does come to mind is something like, for example, the property requirement for senators. And there's a lot of back and forth about whether this should be abolished. A bill comes around every few years. And one of the best arguments tends to be that for places like Nunavut, personal property is, the way the things are structured there's very little personal property up there, so it makes it difficult for someone representing the territory to meet that qualification. So that's a possible example. Also, I mean, we are entering in a period where, with the housing challenges and so on, that owning property may become a bigger issue for people who are looking to sit in the Senate, but it's also a really low bar. So I don't know that there's much, if it's a big deal there. But I couldn't find, like, when looking through, I couldn't find a lot of things that were necessarily out of date in a sense about how the country itself governs. But as for the question of something that I would personally like to see changed, I think that one is pretty much the preamble of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms about the supremacy of God and that kind of stuff. I think we've moved on a little more from that than anything else. So that's probably what my answer is going to be. And yeah, it was very thought-provoking, though. Thank you. Our next question is from Twitter, and it's from Colleen M., who asks, there seems not to be a limit on Poilievre's parliamentary expenses, but I can't find any reference to it. Do you know whether there is or how I can find out? All parliamentarians' offices have a set budget, and that is for things like staffing and then expenses. But as the leader of a party, Poilievre is able to draw on party expenses. So for a lot of his touring and the big Axe the Tax tour and stuff he's on, a lot of that stuff actually gets paid for by the party and not his parliamentary expenses. So that is probably what you're thinking of. The party kind of sets their own rules around what the leader can bill and so on. That actually became an issue under Andrew Scheer when he was charging the party for a lot of things that he shouldn't have been, and the people on the party side who were supposed to control these things were just kind of letting it go when they probably shouldn't have been, and that's one of the reasons why he ended up being shown the door by the members of his party. But yeah, that's mostly what we would be referring to when we're talking about parliamentary expenses, because yeah, all parliamentarians have an office budget that they pretty much have to stick to. But when you're a party leader, your party will pay certain levels of expenses to kind of let you do the activities that you should, or that they're expecting you to do that you may not have a budget for as a parliamentarian. So. Our last question is also on Twitter, and it's from Moom, aka G Smurfette, and it's a multi-part question, so I'm going to have to kind of go through it, but they're all on the same topic here. But so it starts off: Poilievre was sworn in as Privy Councillor in 2013 as part of his ministerial function. What security clearance does that title hold? There's a bit of a confusion here. As a Privy Councillor, you don't need a security clearance. So it's not like you're a public servant and you have, secret, top secret, so on. Those don't apply because of the different functions of a minister or a parliamentarian than a civil servant. So that doesn't really apply. So it's not like he's got a level. It says he maintains his Privy Councillor title for life, but would he as leader of the opposition as well if he was never a cabinet minister before? Yes, Privy Councillors for life, and we've had a tradition of swearing in leaders of the opposition to Privy Council for several decades now, so that they can access certain information, particularly in times of crisis or so on, so that the Prime Minister can have a more broad consultation with other leaders. That's been going on for a while. So he was a minister before, yes. So that does make it easier, but they didn't have to swear him in separately as they would in other cases. What security level would leader of the opposition hold otherwise without a prior Privy Council function? Again, it's not a question of levels because parliamentarians are not civil servants. Security clearances have to be renewed periodically or in case of a status life change. Would a Privy Council member no longer in politics wouldn't maintain a security clearance? Again, Privy Councillors for life, these are not public servant security clearances. So that's kind of moot in this regard. they don't need to renew because, again, you're privy councillor for life. So the structure of that is different. And it kind of all culminates in all that to shed the light on the online debate of Poilievre's current security clearance level. Shouldn't be a confidential information kept from the public, or is it? In his own words, he refuses an upgrade that would provide him access to top secret information. So again, he can see this anytime because he is a privy councillor, but he chooses not to, because if he sees the information, then he has to essentially be responsible in what he says, and he doesn't want to be responsible. He wants to be able to say as many outrageous things as he possibly can. And so it is a choice for him not to see this information. It is not a question of what level of clearance he has, because as a privy councillor, he is able to see this information. It's a question of he doesn't want to, because he would feel constrained if he did. And that is an age-old Canadian problem of MPs and particularly opposition members preferring to be ignorant critics rather than informed overseers. And that is a long-standing Canadian problem, and it's only getting worse in the current environment because he likes to make things up and trade in conspiracy theories and build this dystopian alternate reality where he is trying to convince people that Trudeau is some kind of a jackbooted dictator and that the country is going to ruin, and so on and so on. So if he has access to proper documents, he can't say things like that necessarily with a straight face. So he chooses not to. That's not a function of a security clearance. That's a function of him being a partisan actor who does not want to behave in a responsible manner. And there's not much we can do about that. And that's everything for this week. Thank you for all of your questions. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. It's at journo_Dale and journodale _no on Bluesky. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.